Kathy Gibson have been doing on our task force implementation team. It is just fantastic. Some of the changes that we are all going to see within the next year. It's been a little bit of a rough road from my standpoint, trying to figure out where I'm going and what I'm doing, but I've got a team of people here that are really taking care of me and where we're going, and so I want to thank them. Thank you, Stan, for leading the applause. I think that's important. But and then I have a few other comments that I wanted to make too, and that is, remember, my big deal this year is make sure we all contribute to our service foundation and how important it is. And part of what we're doing this year, and Vicki will applaud this obviously, and this has to do with our special $75,000 grant. This is a lump grant that we solicit various organizations, nonprofit organizations throughout the Seattle area that are focusing on downtown and revitalization of downtown in one way or another. And we get to vote on the recipient of this $75,000 pledge. And the whole idea is that we want to encourage organizations to apply, and the application process is due on December 16th. And so that means that if any of you have any contacts through nonprofits that might be recipients of the $75,000 grant, please let them know that they can contact Vicki. It's on our website. We really would love them to apply so that we have more of a group to be able to determine who the recipients are of this. So contact Vicki or any one of our the board members of our foundation for that. Thank you, Vicki. That deserves an applause too, because our service foundation has done a stupendous job involved with the implementation and following through on all of the various grants that we're going to be able to give. And we'll be able to give those grants because we contribute dollars, and that's the key. Well, given that, I've talked too much right now, and it's time for us to sing. And start, and we've already had our land acknowledgement. You guys can see that, and we'll scroll through for any visitors. But I'm going to call upon Linda Rupp. You want to? Are you going to sing, or are you going to? You're going to play, but you can sing too. But I'm going to. This means everybody get up. Thank you, Faith has gotten that. And we've got a whole chorus here of singers, and I'm turning this over to Linda.
White Christmas.
You're on.
White Christmas was written by America's most popular composer, Irving Berlin, who himself was a Russian Jew, and immortalized by Bing Crosby as the highest selling tune of all time. So join the Rotary carolers. White Christmas.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you very much, Linda and the Rotary Caroler. This brings me back to my junior high age when we used to go caroling around the neighborhood. And it didn't matter whether you celebrated Christmas or not. It was just a great way to enjoy the season. Well, at this point, I wanted to thank Arik Foreman for greeting today. There were a few others listed here for me, but they weren't greeting, so they're not gonna get a thank you. I also want to thank Pete for our meeting reporting. We've already welcomed the guests, and now I'm going to ask Vicky to come forward to talk a little bit about an introduction of our Rotary Boys and Girls Club. So go to it, Vicky.
Thanks, President John. It's my pleasure to welcome Kendrick Davis, who is a Seattle Ford Rotarian. Kendrick joined the Boys and Girls Club of King County in May of 2021 with over 10 years of experience with clubs throughout the Pacific Northwest. He began his club journey as a youth member, and as a staff member now, he has worked in many operational roles supporting the clubs. As a former club member, he knows firsthand the impact the Boys and Girls Clubs have on youth that it serves. He's excited to continue his work as the area director of the Rotary Boys and Girls Club. Please welcome Kendrick Davis.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Good afternoon. So I'm here to talk about exciting opportunity to help make a difference in the lives of our local club youth. But I'm gonna talk a little bit about the Boys and Girls Club just in general for those that are not familiar with the club. So the Boys and Girls Club is an organization that provides out of school time activities for kids in the community. The Rotary Boys and Girls Club is located in the Central District, and the club provides youth and families key programs that are part of the original Seattle Rotary Foundation's focus, and we've evolved our programs over the years to meet the current needs of our youth. Programs in the club are focused on academic success, healthy lifestyles, and character and leadership. Some of the examples of the most recent things that we've done at the club, we have a mental health program that's piloted at the Rotary Boys and Girls Club. We currently have 2 licensed therapists that are on site. So we're not only able to offer services, but these are at no cost to our kids. So we are able to do individual services and then group therapy. And then in early 2025, we'll be able to do art therapy as well for the kids at the Rotary Boys and Girls Club. The club has grown over quite a bit in the last couple of years coming out of the pandemic. So in the 2022-23 school year, we were serving about 50 kids a day. And then fast forward to this school year, we're serving over 70 kids a day. And so that jump honestly is due to the supportive relationships between the staff, the safe environment that we have. And that club is just a fun place to live, to learn, and to lead. It's, it's a second home to a lot of people, right? A lot of people, they reference just that place on the corner, 19th and Spruce, as a place that they grew up. It's their second home. There's a basketball player, Paolo Banchero, he's got it tattooed on his arm, right? So it means a lot of things to a lot of people in this community. So I'd also like to acknowledge the incredible relationship and partnership between the Boys and Girls Club and the Seattle Florida Rotary Club and the Service Foundation. So thanks to the support, we've been able to fund our programs, improve the facility, and continue to provide services that benefit countless youth and teens over many years. So to talk about the holiday shopping event, so on December 14th, from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Our club's advisory board is hosting a holiday shopping event at the West Seattle Target. It's a fantastic opportunity to help fulfill holiday wish lists from all of our club kids. So in early October, we ask all of our families to ask their kids to write down 1 or 2 things that they would like to have before the year's end. And so they submit all those things to us, and then we compile that list. And then our cab will go out and shop on the 14th to make something bright for the end of the year. So the impact of that, you'll be helping bring joy to these young people. That your generosity, if you're able to come out and help out, will make a difference in their lives, providing them with toys and essential supplies and clothes that they may not otherwise receive. So if you're able to, on the 14th, come make a difference. If you're not able to make it, I know there's another event coming out. There's a way to help out. There's a Amazon wish list that you can help out. You could also just drop off items at the club on 19th and Spruce, whether it's a coat or mittens or anything like that. There's so many things that our teens and our young people could use that we're always trying to help out. We have families all throughout the year that need things, especially coming after winter break. We do backpack refreshes for school supplies as well. So anything that you could drop off would make a huge difference for both elementary and teens. And I want to keep reiterating that because our teens often get left out. We focus so much on our elementary kids, but our teens, those middle and high schoolers, they attend the club as well. So again, I appreciate your time, appreciate your support. Happy holidays.
Well, thanks a lot, Kendrick. We own that building. We're the ones that put that whole thing together. And so we owe ourselves a round of applause for that. And we keep them in the black, as so to speak, and not running into the red. And it's most important as part of our support from the Rotary Service Foundation. I've got all these people out here that will start with the applause. But one of the other things, Kendrick, that they can do too, if you can't make the event, you can drop off things, but you can also drop off a check. That would actually be better. Just drop off a check or give a check to Kendrick. And it will go a long ways, and it'll be a tax deduction too, in case you're interested. All right, well, thank you, Kendrick. And now I'm going to call upon one of our members, who happens to be the executive director of the Endowment for Equal Justice, Annie Ramirez, who is going to come up here. And just as a matter of course, I should let you know that I'm on Annie's board, and so she's sort of my boss as far as the Endowment for Equal Justice, but she's going to come up and introduce our speaker today. Come on up, Annie.
Thank you, President John. Hi, everybody. I have the pleasure of introducing our guest speaker. And before that, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context on how we know each other. As John mentioned, I'm the director for the Endowment for Equal Justice. And it's the largest civil legal aid endowment in the country dedicated to providing legal aid. And in partnership with all over Washington State. This year it was 60, and one of our strongest partnerships and longest partnerships is with Columbia Legal Services, and or CLS, as we like to say. And so I have the privilege of introducing our speaker, Merf. As the executive director of CLS, Merf leads organization-wide efforts to prioritize advocacy that supports community-led social justice efforts that transform racialized systems and eradicate racism. Merf credits the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond for training, supporting, and challenging Merf and CLS staff on what it means to be an anti-racist organization. Merf graduated from the State University of New York at Buffalo School of Law with a concentration in affordable housing. Merf worked as an attorney with CLS for almost 10 years, litigating civil rights, disability rights, and affordable housing cases, as well as working on. Further ado, here is Merf to tell us more about CLS.
People. All right. See if I can do it. Oh, okay, I got it. All right, so yeah, I'm Merf Ehman. I'm the executive director of Columbia Legal Services. And when you first think about, look at me and what do you think? What's your opinion? And then we'll talk more about that as we go forward. About first impressions. All right, so I have 20 minutes. I'll try not to be boring. So what we do is we are a legal organization, but we don't take any federal, state, or local money because that money comes with strings and it says you can't represent certain types of people who are in prison or people who are undocumented, and you can't do certain kinds of cases like class action lawsuits, and you can't go to the legislature and change an unjust law. So that's why we exist. Next slide. Oh, that's me. Than a day. All right. So this poem really speaks to me, and I think that it's really important as I stand here before you that you know something about me, because I'm going to talk about some difficult things, and I want you to know where I've been and what I think about. And so we all, when we're in, whether in friendship or in business relationships, we're all at times asked to tell our story. And particularly as a legal aid organization, we're often asking people to tell their stories to the court. And why is that difficult? Telling. See if I can read this. Telling. And Laura Hershey, by the way, was a disability rights activist. She passed away about 10 years ago. What you risk telling your story, you will bore them. Your voice will break, your ink spill and stain your coat. No one will understand. Their eyes become fences. You will park yourself forever on the outside. Your differentness, once and for all revealed, dangerous. The names you give to yourself will become epithets. Your happiness be called bravery, denial. Your sadness will justify their pity. Your fear will magnify their fears. Everything you say will prove something about their God or their economic system. Your feelings that change day to day, kaleidoscope, will freeze in place, brand you forever, justify anything they decide to do with you. Those with power can afford to tell their story, or not. Those without power risk everything to tell their story and must. Someone, somewhere, will hear your story and decide to fight, to live, and refuse compromise. Someone else will tell her own story, risking everything. So that's what we're going to do today. So my story starts back in the foothills of Appalachia. My family always said the foothills because that was the little better, apparently. I didn't know that till I was older, but yeah, in the Allegheny Mountains and on the New York-Pennsylvania border. I started out in a school that was K through 12. My father was a Korean War veteran and had been a prisoner of war survivor. I grew up with lots of guns. There's a great story. When I was 3 years old, the police came to our property and I said, "Get out of there, you GD hippies."
and threw rocks at the police car. So that was my auspicious start with justice and the police department. And so my dad was a great guy. He taught me how to shoot guns, but he also was a violent alcoholic. And we also were extremely poor. Many times in the middle of winter, we didn't have heat or hot water or enough to eat. Some of my friends in school were still using outhouses. That's what it was like. There were statistics. I once went to a training about what are the chances of people in certain zip codes getting out of poverty. My chance was 0.6% from where I came from. I have that slide up there because I have been a victim of gun violence. And I tell this story, and for those that have been victims of gun violence, this might be triggering, but I think it's important to talk about these things because these are things that I never talked about. So when I was 8 years old, I was tired of my father's drinking, and being someone who throws rocks at cop cars, I thought I could fix this situation as well. And so I went into his car underneath the driver's seat. We had a car every once in a while. So I pulled out his vodka bottle and I poured it out. He went into a fit of rage when he went into the car to try to find that vodka bottle. And he flipped out and he's like, "Who did this?" And my mom pointed at me, simply answering the question. He got out his .22 rifle and he chased me around the house. I was terrified because I knew he could shoot. I knew he could throw a beer bottle up in the air and hit it at 50 feet. So I hid under the bed, the shots were flying, and I was terrified. Eventually, someone came and took my dad, and he went to jail overnight. And then he came back the next day, and nothing happened. Nothing happened. I never talked about that again. And there were other things that happened in the house. So at 12 years old, I developed a serious drug problem, huffing model airplane glue, which led to substance abuse and alcoholism later in life. And I did many things that I'm not proud of. Selling drugs to teenagers when I was in my 21 years old. Assault, all of those things, selling drugs. And I didn't end up in prison. I didn't end up in jail, even though I committed felonies, felony assault, felony selling drugs. And I was in New York State, so I could have gone to prison for a very, very long time, but not me. Think about why. Think about why I wasn't taken away as a child. I was put into the mental health system. I was mental health arrested on one occasion and spent a significant amount of time involuntarily committed. I was eventually able to get some help, some services. I was put into a welfare to work program, one of the first ones in New York State, and I wanted to get placed in the Meals on Wheels program because you got free lunch. And at that time, I got placed into a legal aid program. I had never met an attorney in my life. I didn't really know the difference between an inside voice and an outside voice. I was that young person passed out drunk in the snowbank that you walked by. I was a person trying to take the bus with half a dollar bill that I stuffed into the money compartment so that I could survive. So I was placed into this program. I got substance abuse treatment. I got some job coaching. The most embarrassing part was that my job coach had to come with me, which was horrific. And I didn't know how to be in an office. My dad had been military. He had been a bomb shelter inspector for the county. And so didn't have his office was in a basement in a bomb shelter. So I didn't know how to trifold an envelope. I didn't know how to have conversations with people. I didn't know how to type. I was made the receptionist, which I hated. I was terrible at that. And I kept hanging up on people. I was really angry at the time. And they said, "I don't think you should be up front answering phone calls." And so they put me back and I did inventory. But what changed there was one person in the office whose son had serious mental health issues and said, I believe in you. I think that you can learn to type. And so I was terrible with a copier, but I learned to type. And that was the first time that I felt there were some other people in my life, but believed in. And I thought because of how I looked that the only job I could get was working in a bar, working in a kitchen, those kinds of jobs, because I felt being queer and being from the family that I was from, that was it for me, that was probably doing really well. So some of them said, well, why don't you go to law school? I was like, what are you talking about? I didn't even like lawyers at the time. I thought they were problematic. So, yeah, right. So eventually, eventually then on my sort of second stint in the mental health institution, this guy who had been trying to help me, I think he was a member of the Rotary. He was kind of an upstanding guy and doing service, trying to help the unfortunate. And he was the county commissioner. And so he showed up, Jim Malone was his name, and he's like, you have such potential. And I'm like, Jim, I don't even have my shoelaces. Like, I'm here in a gown. What are you talking about? He's like, you can do great things. I'm like, yeah, let me first get out of here. So they eventually let me out. I went into another program and eventually finished my education. But then there was another person that believed in me. And so 5 years on public benefits. And then I was cooking in a kitchen, had a job, very steady, working for the Marriott Corporation. My mom particularly was ecstatic because she could go to a Marriott. Not that she ever did, but if she went, she could stay there for $29 a night. And it was free food. And so I was set for life. My family thought I was set for life. Why would I ever leave that? But then Jim and some others said cooking is a noble profession, but perhaps you could do more, perhaps. And so we never know how things are going to impact us. So from that summer, I was working on a merchant marine ship. And I worked on a merchant marine. I had never flown in an airplane, but I got to travel around the world. And I thought, when I was in Greece, I thought if my welfare worker could see me now. And so I hopped off the merchant marine ship and I went to law school. I studied for the LSATs while I was on the ship. And when I was applying for jobs and when I was in the welfare to work program and when I was applying to law school, nobody ever asked me, have you ever committed a crime? Nobody ever asked me that question. Nobody asked me if I was a criminal, if I had ever hurt anyone. What they asked me was, do you have a criminal record? Have you ever been arrested or convicted of a crime? And what did I get to say? No, I haven't. Nobody ever asked me if I had been mental health arrested. So that brings us to this idea and this controversy in our country about what is white privilege and what does it mean to be white and what does it mean to have a racial identity of being white. And so our organization has begun and continues to struggle with that question as our society does as well. And so we change some of the ways that we do our work. If we're thinking about race, what we realized and what I realized is if I was in a courtroom or if I was in a mediation or I was at the legislature, I and my colleagues were deciding how much oppression someone would suffer. And so we wanted to change that because we were always compromising and always negotiating. And yes, some progress is better than perfection, but at whose expense? And what does that look like? And should it be me deciding or should it be the people most impacted deciding? So we started to think about some of the work that Brian Stevenson was doing, which was very similar to our work. And that we had to get proximate. We had to be with and alongside the people that we were serving and the people that we were working with. We had to be proximate and we had to be in relationship. It couldn't just be transactional. It had to be more than that. So I'm going to try to show this video because we also needed to understand our history.
In 1619, first Africans were brought to the British colonies by ship to Jamestown, Virginia. They held the legal status of servant. But as the region's economic system became increasingly dependent on forced labor, we descended into slavery. The institution of American slavery developed as a permanent, hereditary system centrally tied to race. Millions of Black people were forcibly taken from Africa, crammed on ships and brought to the Americas through a dangerous and deadly journey that crossed the Atlantic. Millions died. Once on our shores, slavery deprived the enslaved person of any legal rights or autonomy, and granted the slave owner complete power over the Black men, women, and children legally recognized as property. An ideology of white supremacy, a narrative of racial difference was created to rationalize and justify the continuation of slavery. American slavery was often brutal, barbaric, and violent. In addition to the hardship of forced labor, enslaved people were maimed or killed by slave owners as punishment for working too slowly, visiting a spouse living on another plantation, or even learning to read. Enslaved people were also sexually exploited. The United States Congress finally banned the importation of slaves from Africa in 1808. Slavery was widely considered a gross human rights violation. Yet, enslavement was retained and persisted. The 1808 Declaration caused the demand for slave labor to skyrocket in the Lower South, and the domestic slave trade grew to meet this demand. Between 1808 and 1860, the enslaved population of Alabama grew from less than 40,000 to more than 435,000. Slave traders chained African Americans together in couples and forced them to march hundreds of miles from the Upper South to the Lower South. Steamboats carried slaves along the Alabama River. Railroads constructed with slave labor brought hundreds of enslaved people to Montgomery, Alabama every day, turning the city into one of the largest slave trading communities in the United States. Enslaved people would be paraded up Commerce Street to slave warehouses and slave depots. The city's slave market was at the Artesian Basin, now known as Court Square. Enslaved people of all ages were auctioned along with livestock, standing in line to be inspected. Public posters advertising the sale of slaves included gender, age, skill, complexion, owner's name, and price. Slavery in America traumatized and devastated millions of people. Husbands and wives, parents and children could not protect themselves from being sold away from each other. Enslaved families were separated at an owner's or auctioneer's whim, never to see each other again. The domestic slave trade separated nearly half of all enslaved people from their spouses and parents. In 1833, the Alabama legislature banned free Black people from residing in the state, meaning that enslavement was the only legally authorized status for African Americans. Even as the Civil War raged, slave trading in Montgomery flourished well into the mid-1860s. After the Confederacy's surrender in 1865, Congress passed the 13th Amendment, which prohibited slavery nationwide except as a punishment for crime. But in many former slave states, slavery did not end, it simply evolved. Southern whites, angry after losing the war, targeted Black people who were largely abandoned by the federal government in the 1870s. For decades, Black men, women, and children were tortured, terrorized, and killed by mobs and violent lynchings, oppressed by a system of racist laws and customs. For another 100 years, Black people were racially segregated, denied the right to vote, education, and basic dignity. They were humiliated, beaten, or killed for minor offenses or for protesting. The civil rights movements of the 1950s and 60s helped to end legally authorized racial segregation, but racial bias still persists. Today, a presumption of guilt is assigned to many people of color who are disproportionately arrested, convicted of crimes, and sent to prison. African Americans are 6 times more likely to be sentenced to prison for the same crime as a white person. 1 in 3 Black males born today can expect to spend time in prison during his lifetime. Police violence against Black people is so epidemic that civil rights demonstrations have shut down cities across the U.S. as thousands of people march to protest police brutality. Many states celebrate the era of slavery with Confederate holidays and by honoring the defenders and architects of slavery while ignoring the history of enslavement. The Equal Justice Initiative believes that racial bias remains a serious problem and is a direct and lasting legacy of American slavery and our failure to deal with the history of racial injustice. The Equal Justice Initiative seeks to foster an honest conversation about the legacy of slavery, about mass incarceration, and racial inequality and how it still affects millions of people today. We can confront and overcome bias and discrimination. Please join us in this conversation so that we can
So join us in this so we can overcome bias. So we realized that we had to understand our history, and our organization, We represent people who are in prison, but we didn't understand the roots of that. And we represent agricultural workers and other workers who are undocumented, who work in our fields and in our restaurants and in other industries. People who are undocumented are everywhere. And so we need to understand the history of immigration in our country, which is a history of white supremacy, which is the only people were white men of good character, the only people. And that continued, particularly in Seattle with the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was national, but there were race riots around Chinese exclusion. This is not new. These two systems are not an aberration. They are connected. We lock people up for immigrating to this country. We lock people up for many, many solutions. I was never locked up. I was a horrible person making horrible choices, hurting people and hurting society. And I never went to jail. I never went to prison. And I stand before you as a competent, healthy person contributing to our world. So punishment, to me, is not the answer. So what is the answer? How can we restore people? The answer is around systems. Services are great and services are helpful, but we have to get back to the systems that created the need for those services in the first place. And so what we try to do is to talk to the people who are most impacted by these systems to be able to make systemic change and work towards justice. We look at doing community-led legal advocacy, and it's challenging to work with and for people together as lawyers. And so we set some long-term goals. Those long-term goals is that no one in Washington state is caged. We hope someday long-term we can get there. And yes, we haven't figured that out yet. What would that look like in our world? What would it look like if we moved to a system of accountability and healing rather than of punishment and shame? And that everybody, whether you're incarcerated or whether you are undocumented, that you have the access to the same rights and benefits of everyone else in our state. Well, imagine that kind of a world, and yet we have this cognitive dissonance about this fear. And so how can we move the world forward, not fear-based, but based on hope and based on healing, based on conversation, and that folks can come together to build their collective power to make change together, and that everyone is a part of our community. Even me, passed out in a snowbank, was part of the community. And people were not afraid of me. So we try to work from principles that our work is relational rather than transactional. We're not just giving someone a client agreement and having them sign it. We're building relationships with communities and with individuals. We try to think about what is our power and privilege in this legal relationship when we're working with and for people. What does that look like? How do we manage that power and privilege? If I'm white and I'm working with a group that's predominantly Black, what does that look like? How can we have those kinds of conversations? So we were beginning to talk about movement lawyering. So we started with, I'll get this eventually. Okay. We started with looking at systems. And so in the food system, what does that look like? There are all these different parts. There's healthcare, there's pesticides that make people really ill. So how many people, when you bit into your lunch today, thought about where that food came from? Did anybody? I see one hand, two hands, three. Where does that food come from? Who planted that seed? Who picked that fruit or that vegetable? Who brought it to the grocery store? Who sold it to you? What kind of labor went into that? Were they paid? Were they paid well? Who made that meal? And so we have to think about those kinds of things. And one example of this is that agricultural workers in Washington did not get overtime. They were excluded. And why was that? Well, we had been doing wage claim cases for 30 years. And we just said, well, that's the law, you're excluded. But then we looked back at the history, as Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative asked us to do, and sharecroppers were left out of the Fair Labor Standards Act. They were almost all Black, as were domestics, who were almost all Black women. And so we looked at that, and Washington adopted the Fair Labor Standards Act word for word and excluded agriculture workers. So we brought a case for wage claims, but we also brought an equal protection case, saying that it was discriminatory and a violation of the state constitution to exclude agricultural workers. And we won, barely, 5-4 in the Washington State Supreme Court. But we ended that racist legacy. And yet, every year since that time, we've had to go back to the legislator to defend that success. Because every time there is a victory, every time a racial exclusion is ended or progress is made on race in this country, there is always a backlash. For example, we were trying to shut down the Northwest Detention Center. It's privately owned and it's a for-profit facility. We passed a law that would have eventually shut it down. We worked with community to be able to do that, and a lawsuit was filed to stop that from happening. And so we went and we passed another law to say, well, if you're going to do that, there at least has to be humane conditions for that. We also try to stand with workers. So we were working with mushroom pickers. Everybody enjoy mushrooms? Well, mushroom pickers tried to organize. It's difficult work in the dark. And they were all fired for trying to organize. We worked with the state attorney general's office, but they said, you know what? We don't want to file a lawsuit. We're afraid. Not many of us have proper immigration status. And so what did we do? We worked with them and worked with the AG's office to be able to have them be qualified for deferred action. And then at that point, they had some trust. We had clinics. We were able to get around 75 of those workers immigration status. And then we filed lawsuit for the illegal actions of their employer. So I think I'm getting close to time. Right? I have 5 minutes?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay. I'll go quickly. So the 13th Amendment, you saw that in the video. So slavery still exists in this country. Did everyone know that? So people in prison can be subject to slavery. And so we are trying to end that, especially for young people. We represented young people who were being moved to adult prison, even though there's a law that says they can stay there until they're 25. Why? Because young people's brains are different. Science shows that. And yet the state kept doing that with no due process and no notice and no reason. So the law says that you can move these children to an adult facility if they're dangerous, if they're harming the other kids. There are specific reasons, but they weren't following that. So we settled the lawsuit. Kids were getting hearings. Not many were being moved. They were doing great. Many of the kids were in school. And then they, with no notice to us, even though the lawsuit said, even in an emergency, you have to at least call or give us notice that you want to transfer the kids. They didn't do that. They violated the rule of law, transferred 47 young men, many who were in school, many whose education was interrupted. And we immediately, the attorneys worked all weekend to try to get those kids back. We filed a lawsuit. It was a preliminary injunction. You may have heard about this lawsuit about the kids because of the overcrowding. And why is there overcrowding? Because we're starting to arrest kids again. Crime rates haven't increased, but arresting and putting kids in, we built a new youth jail and we're filling it. Dow Constantine said, we won't fill it, don't worry, and we're filling it. There's serious overcrowding. The rate of incarceration for youth in King County has dramatically increased over the last 3 years. So I won't talk about some of these other cases, but think about who benefits from slavery in prison, who benefits from wages, nonprofits, daycares, workplaces, state workplaces receive office chairs and those kinds of things. If you're in prison and you're not getting enough to eat, as many don't, or you're not getting nutritional food and you go to the commissary, if you were making the state minimum wage and it was proportional, how much would you pay for a 7-ounce piece of ham? You would pay $81.40. Similar with ramen noodles. So I'm going to end there and say that there is hope. We can do this together. We can think really big. We can move towards healing. We can move towards accountability. We can solve complex problems in Seattle and in Washington, like homelessness. If I can go to where I was, then as a community, we can go to where we want to go. Thank you.
Please stay there. Please stay there for questions. We have questions for you. Merf. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm not a professional.
Hi, Merf. Thank you for your Sorry. Thank you for your comments. I think your work is maybe God's work. I don't know. What fears do you have about the incoming administration impacting CLS?
Yeah, our biggest fear is our capacity. There's going to be huge workplace raids, and I'm confident there will be mass deportations. We're concerned that Washington will be targeted. We're concerned about national stop and frisk, that more and more people, particularly Black men and brown men, will be arrested and incarcerated. Where I am and our organization is concerned about the rule of law. There's already a shift away from the rule of law. Fundamentally, the fundamental piece of this country that's so important is that we have a court system and we have a system of checks and balances. And we are going to have to fight incredibly hard to preserve that system. Great question. Thanks.
Is your next question?
Thank you. You talked about what you're doing here in Washington State. Is there a state that is the most progressive, that's farther along, that is kind of a role model for what you and other states are doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's kind of interesting because you heard about Alabama's doing some really amazing and interesting work. There's some movements there around incarceration, around restorative justice and those kinds of things, ending life without parole. They did that in Alabama. That's where it started. In Louisiana, they are trying to end cash bail, and they tried to end non-unanimous juries. So I would say New York State is doing some incredible work around these issues, around immigration. California is trying to be a sanctuary state and a sanctuary city, not Florida. Not Mississippi. I have colleagues across. Nebraska is doing some incredible work around farm workers and around collective action in communities to end fines and fees. Because folks that go to jail, they don't just, once they've done their time, they come out, they may have anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 in debt that they owe. But it's different for different people. There's no one system and there's no easy way to pay it off, and you can never get out from under, especially if you're in prison earning $1 an hour in your job. So there is some great work happening, and we are working across the country. There's the Shriver Center for Poverty Law has the Legal Impact Network. And so all of us trying to do this work are trying to talk to each other, to learn from each other and do better. Great question. Thank you.
And here's our last question.
Thanks. I was hoping you could go back to that slide that says what you're going to do in the legislature this year so that we can be aware of it and support your efforts if we get to have a legislature that is planned.
Yeah, I can talk about, come on. Okay, so whoops. I am so sorry. All right. So this is some of what we've done in 2023 and 2024, and great question. In 2025, we're going to be working on free prison phone calls. We're going to try to preserve all of the victories that we made in the past. We are looking to continue healthcare for people who are undocumented because that's a huge issue. A more controversial issue has been trying to get unemployment insurance for people who are undocumented, who are working and paying into the system. Yes, under a false social security number, but they are paying in, and if they lose their job, they have no safety net. So we are also looking at possible legislation to defend the rule of law. One of the things we will be doing is our policy director reads every single bill that comes through. He looks at every single bill. And so we do a lot of defense. So we will also be trying to preserve bad bills, trying to prevent bad bills from happening. So that's some of the work we'll try to get done with the budget. With the huge deficit that's predicted, it's going to be challenging to do anything that requires a fiscal note. And if you're interested in what we're doing, you can sign up for our listserv just to know. And we do calls of action. If you choose to, you can contact your legislator. So great question. Great segue. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thanks a lot, Merf, and realize that the dollars that Columbia Legal Services gets are not from the government. They are either from our equal endowment for equal justice, and they come from private individuals mainly because, as Merf said, a lot of the strings that government has made it very difficult for the organization to represent individuals in certain having to do with certain issues. So we want to thank Merf again and realize that our Seattle Rotary Service Foundation has provided a gift of 600 meals to Harvest Against Hunger on her behalf in her name. And so I also want to invite Merf to join our Rotary Club too. We would love to have you as a member, and I know that we'll send you an application form. That's going to be Mary and Stephen's responsibility. So thank you very much. And now, without further ado, I'm going to ask David Froome to come forward to give us some announcements, and then I get to close us out.
Great. Well, as it turns out, I won't be around for quite a few of those. I'm going to visit family far away. But nevertheless, wanted to let you know that on Saturday, December 14th, the Wellspring holiday service event starts at 10 a.m. until noon. Please join us for our next service session at Wellspring Family Services. Volunteers will support Family Store Programs Extension, providing holiday gifts for children facing homelessness and hardship. Sorry. Task will include sorting incoming gifts and packing orders to go directly to families. It will include light lifting and walking. Day of tasks will vary based on the greatest need. We will need a list of all volunteers we should expect by December 10th. So please register on our Mayberry today. On Wednesday, December 18th, lunch meeting at the Triple Door with Brett Smith from Microsoft. And that should be quite exciting. And he's the vice chair and the president of Microsoft. And it will be held at the Triple Door rather than here, just down the hill. Thursday, and on the 19th, we have our own annual holiday party at the Queen City Yacht Club from 5 to 8 p.m. And this year marks the return of the Seattle Rotary Mariners being in charge of the party entertainment. Whoa, that would be good then. Bring your dancing shoes as we will enjoy live holiday music from Sam Russell and the Harbor Rats. During the evening, expect a delicious spread from Chef Willie and drink served strong by fellow club members. Whoa, amazing. And lastly, on January 8th, lunch meeting at Pier 55. Socialize at noon. Meeting runs as usual from 12:30 to 1:30. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Don't forget also that what Kendrick has brought up too for our Rotary Boys and Girls Club and dollars and also shopping for much of the same thing that the Wellspring Family Services is doing. So the more the merrier for the holiday season. I also want to thank REB Enterprises, Carl Benke, and Bloodworks Northwest for their meeting sponsorship. Got to get all of these things in, and thank you for the bell, but it's not yet time. I mean, actually, I could just keep going, but, you know, we might actually get out of here a little bit early. And I hate to do that. I like to have a captive audience here. You know, but this is all really exciting. We a lot of the things that Merf has talked about when you talk about the project that Brian Stevenson has in the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama is just incredible. If you ever have an opportunity to go and see the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, and to see the sculpture garden that has been established, as well as the memorial to all of those who have been killed by violence. All of that is in Montgomery and is really quite spectacular. There's also the state capitol, but we won't talk about that, you know. Although I did tour the state capitol, it's rather interesting. It's old, but very pretty, until they start talking about the history behind it, and it can get a little bit iffy. Anyway, enough of all of that. I'm not going to pontificate anymore, but I want to thank Merf for being here and providing us with some of that background and some of the DEI programs that Rotary has been sponsoring and that we have been involved in for the last few years. Well, let's talk about the historical occurrences that happened on December 4th. In 1816, James Monroe was elected to become the 5th president of the United States. In 1844, James Knox Polk was elected the 11th president of the U.S. And in 1927, Duke Ellington opened the Cotton Club in Harlem, New York. 1969 was the birth date for Jay-Z. I trust you know who Jay-Z was. If not, you know, you can ask after I ding the bell. And today is Navy Day in India. Enough of all of that. We are adjourned.